Все окей? Пані Євгенія, так, можемо розпочинати.
Так, будь ласка.
Доброго дня, шановні колеги. Радий вітати вас. Ми розпочинаємо нашу робочу зустріч, організовану німецько-українським аерополітичним бюро.
APD and the Chamber of Commerce. The topic is the presentation and comments from our international expert, Richard Moody. This is actually related to the draft law of Ukraine on food trade, and this is actually the draft where we have signed the memorandum on in regulating relationship between the trade chains as well as the manufacturers. So we actually requested APD to share some comments regarding this draft legislation so that then we have an opportunity to discuss this under the parliamentary committee and in the parliament in general to see what the strengths and weaknesses are. And Richard Moody will actually focus on the European integration context in line with the European directive. So having analyzed this legislation, we will be able to see the strengths and weaknesses that we will be able to discuss and work on. I already introduced our very well-known expert, Richard Moody. And Richard, honestly, we want to welcome you here and say, can you hear us well? Yes, everything is all right. So today, during the meeting, we have representatives from the Agriculture Committee, from the Chamber of Commerce, also the experts from the project, as well as our colleagues from business and leaders of civil society organizations who are actively engaged in the development of this bill, and also the signees of this signatories to this draft. I will briefly share some information about why it was our initiative to send a request to APD, because it's been almost a year since we started our work in this very challenging environment, and we have done a lot of activities nevertheless. Of course, the Economic Committee, together with the Ministry of Economy, set up the working group, which has done a lot of meetings with the supply chains and associations. And of course, I'm not going to be assessing the productiveness of this work, because just recently our colleagues, hopefully they will refer to this today as well, they referred to all these challenging things that unfortunately sometimes they cannot see some of the tangible results from the working group and outputs as well. So, but this issue, however, is very challenging, and we need to build the policy. Hopefully today, our colleagues will have an opportunity to ask questions after Mr. Moody makes the presentation. And maybe we're going to just exchange and share the vision for the future, the next steps and joint action that we'll be actively engaged in to put in life all these initiatives. Of course, it seems to me this situation is even more challenging because on top of the indebtedness, we also have the sanctions. I recently talked to several colleagues of mine, and farmers, I mean, there are the small producers. One in Zhytomyr had like 500,000 hryvnia penalty to pay. And this, unfortunately, indebtedness is getting more accrued, so we need to find solutions somehow. So if you allow me, I would pass the floor to Mr. Richard Moody, and then we're going to continue our discussion and exchange. Richard, please, the floor is yours. We're so glad to welcome you here and listen to your presentation, hear from you about the comments and recommendations, please.
Super. Thank you very much, Oleg. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very glad to be with you and very pleased to have been invited to participate in this activity. And I would like to congratulate the working group on your excellent work on this very positive initiative, and to the excellent work done in preparing the memorandum, signing the memorandum, and drafting the draft law. So I'm just trying to sort out a technical issue here. There we go. So just a few points on the scope of the analysis that I did. I won't be presenting the analysis in great detail, but I'd like to highlight some of the key points, and then relatively quickly move to any discussion and questions, etc. But you're all very well aware of the directive, and so I will just look at the work done in terms of the memorandum and the draft law in the context of that directive. But I'd like to start by saying that, of course, whilst there are obligations undertaken through the signing of the association agreement and the DCFTA, in this particular case, the obligation is to gradually approximate the laws and make them compatible with the EU acquis. And so the deadlines and the specific requirements of the directive are, of course, not directly applicable to Ukraine, only in terms of a gradual approximation of the legislation. I'd also like to just briefly mention the selection of the directive as the instrument of regulation chosen by the EU. You'll all be aware that the directive is different from other regulatory instruments in that it essentially provides the objectives and the results that need to be achieved through the regulatory process, but doesn't specify how those results should be achieved, and leaves the mechanisms and the specific steps and mechanisms to the individual member states. Of course, having said that, trading with the single EU market means that goods that are exported to and imported from the EU market are subject to the obligations which are imposed on those that participate in that market. So we'll discuss that a bit more later on, but it does impose obligations on exporting countries, in this case Ukraine, but also gives rights to Ukrainian exporters to the EU within the frame of the directive. Next one, please. Next slide, please. Very briefly about the directive. You know the directive very well. It's a directive which is targeted at regulating the imbalances of bargaining power between the strong buyers and the weak suppliers. It's a measure that was long overdue, but as you can imagine, as it essentially interferes with the contracting process between market participants, it's quite a controversial measure, and we can see how controversial and difficult it was from the time taken for many of the member states to implement it. And the sometimes the different approaches that were used by the member states to achieve the objectives. I won't go into details of the specific provisions of the directive, which you all know very well, but it targets 16 specific practices and distinguishes between the 10 black and the 6 grey practices, whereas the black trading practices are prohibited, whatever the circumstances, and the grey practices are allowed under Article 3.2 if the supplier and the buyer agree on them beforehand. It's a directive, it's binding all the member states, but it provides a minimum harmonization level, and as you have done in Ukraine and as other member states have done, it certainly doesn't prevent and indeed encourages more protection, an increased level of protection where that is appropriate in the individual member state. The next slide, please. No, sorry, back. Could you go back one slide? Sorry. So, moving straight to the aim and the scope of the directive. As we say, it's a minimum list of prohibited unfair trading practices, and it's limited to agri-food products, and it explicitly provides the possibility to expand the scope. So what is covered by the directive? It uses a step approach, which is a way of addressing certain requirements to certain specific sizes of market participant, and addresses those specific unfair trading practices, as we've said, dividing them into the black and the grey trading practices. When we're talking about so-called national transposition, which is the way in which the individual member states, and in this case Ukraine, third country, transposes or brings the objectives of the EU regulation, EU directive into their national regulation, it specifically allows the implementing country to be stricter than the directive, and also to go beyond its the scope as defined in the directive. And many countries within the EU, as well as Ukraine, yourselves have expanded the scope. So, for example, in Belgium, just as an example, the Belgians decided to protect all suppliers regardless of their size. So, whereas the directive specifies the size of the suppliers, the Belgian legislator decided to expand it to all suppliers. They also considered that the concept of perishable goods was perhaps going to be problematic, and therefore the Belgian legislation covers both perishable and non-perishable products. They also, as did you in your draft law, extend the scope of the legislation beyond just food for human consumption and included animal feed as well, which I think is a very, which is the right way to do it. I won't dwell on the aspect of complaints and the protection of complainants. My guess is that you have decided to regulate such issues in subordinate legislation. And your draft law provides for subordinate legislation. And so my guess is that that will be dealt with at a future time. The one point that I would like to make just in terms of how the directive impacts on Ukrainian exporters. I know that in general, the Ukrainian draft legislation is looking at regulating the domestic market, but the European directive is very much focused on export and import into the EU. And the point being, it's unlikely to be relevant in too many cases to regulate unfair trading practices by Ukrainian exporters. But there is a right essentially created by the directive to protect Ukrainian exporters to the EU from any EU unfair trading practices. And I think that's an element of scope which could be extended in the, or foreseen in the Ukrainian draft legislation. Next slide, please. So these were a number of questions which over a year ago, when within the framework of the Agri-Trade project, we first started discussing the directive and how it might be implemented together with Oleg and colleagues from the UCCI. These are just a list of questions that that I raised at the time. I won't go into them in detail now, as some of them, many of them have been addressed. But as you'll see from later slide, some of the issues that we considered might be useful to be regulated were not included, and that's something that we can discuss in due course. Next slide, please. Coming now to the concrete provisions of the memorandum and the draft. As we've already said, feed is included, and that is something that other member states have done, and which I think is a very positive development. The next provisions, I'm just seeing, is this 3.2? The next provisions are dealing with specific charges made on payments required from the suppliers, and the first one is about payments for including the product in the display of the retailer, in the assortment of the retailer, and this is a prohibited provision, but with the proviso that such charges shall not be made unless they've been previously agreed in clear and unambiguous terms in the supply agreement. The way the Ukrainian draft law and the directive deal with this proviso is slightly different, but I think the Ukrainian draft law deals with it equally effectively. Slide number 5, please. Next slide. This is a charge related to loss or damage of food products. The article transposes Article 3.1e of the directive, and so essentially transposes that particular article almost directly. Next slide, please. This article transposes this next provision, which is about disposal and destruction, except for cases related to the disposal of food products due to their non-compliance with safety and quality standards. Again, this transposes Article 3.2a almost directly, but is also subject to the agreement proviso. That means that in the directive, it's requires for there to be prior agreement for such a provision to be included. Next slide, please. This is merely a list of some provisions in the Ukrainian draft law which aren't in the EU directive, but which are also not prohibited from being included in such regulation. And as I said at the beginning, essentially, the idea of the directive is to give the implementing member state or third country, in this case, the freedom to be more strict and to implement a wider scope than the directive. And this is what Ukrainian drafters have done in the case of these particular articles. Can you move on to the next one, please? Next slide. Sorry, I think I might be repeating this one. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Yeah. This is about a provision about cancelling the supply of perishable goods, except when such a cancellation is notified at least 30 days before the delivery date. So it transposes this particular article in the draft law, transposes 3.1b, and is very similar and almost directly transposes this. So there's no particular discussion of that particular provision. On to the next one, please. So this next provision, illegal collection, use or disclosure of trade secrets, transposes Article 3.1G of the directive. The directive refers to another directive, but the Ukrainian legislation is quite clear in what in the definition of trade secrets, and so there's no issue there. Next slide, please. Can you go on to the next one, please? Sorry. This is basically a list of the sanctions which are included in the in Article 19.2, and essentially the sanctions in the directive are provided for in a different way. If we can move on to the next slide, please. This is how it's dealt with in the directive in Article 3.1. The difference is not substantive, it's just the difference in the mechanism used and the way that the sanctions are organized in the respective legislation. Can we move on to the next slide, please? This is one of the issues where I think there may be a need for some discussion. Essentially, the Ukrainian legislation made specific reference to trade networks. And whilst we know that these trade networks, so supermarket chains, are the most obvious example of those who could abuse dominant positions, I think it would be safer to describe these networks in general terms, in terms of their position on the market, rather than saying supermarket chains. Otherwise, there's a risk of somebody saying that this is specifically targeted at a type of business or even specific people, rather than a business which is able to exploit its position in the market. But we can discuss that in due course. Next article, please. Next slide, please. Here, we mentioned earlier the so-called agreement proviso, and my understanding of Article 19.3 is that that this is a mechanism for providing for that agreement proviso. That means that trading practices are prohibited unless they've been previously agreed in clear and unambiguous terms in a supply agreement or in a subsequent agreement. That's the way that it's termed in the directive, and I think this is a provision that is intended to provide that same mechanism, which I think the Ukrainian mechanism is a better mechanism, actually. Next slide, please. As we said, there are a number of provisions in the directive which aren't included in the draft law. And as we discussed briefly before this, there is no obligation to include everything into the draft law in Ukraine, and it's quite understandable that some elements of the directive will be considered in future draft laws or subordinate legislation, or at a later date. So I've just listed them there, but this is not an issue that is undermines the integrity of the draft law. Clearly, there are some provisions that will need to be dealt with, and I think the complaints and confidentiality issue is something that needs to be very clearly dealt with. But again, that can be dealt with in subordinate legislation. Clearly, the powers of the enforcement authorities and an alternative dispute resolution mechanism alternate to the mechanism foreseen within the subordinate legislation. I think one issue and another issue which I think is necessary to deal with is the issue of the way that the memorandum is phrased, which mentions national producers and processors. In fact, this could theoretically raise the issue of compliance with the WTO national treatment principle, by which, of course, national and third country producers and processors are required to be treated in the same way. But I think it's this is just in the memorandum, it's not in the draft law, and so I think it wouldn't be an issue, but it's something that needs to be borne in mind in the finalization of the law drafting process, not to mention national producers and processors, but just about processors and producers who are selling on the domestic market. Next slide, please. Or is there a question on that? Not very long to go. Couple more slides. As I said, the outstanding issues to... sorry, no, next slide, which is, yeah. Next slide, please. I've just dealt with that issue. There are just, as raised earlier, these are the issues which I think will need to be discussed in future work of the working group. The issues of how the complaints will be dealt with, the mechanism, how they'll be protected, issues like, will the rights be enforced based on complaints only or ex officio? So ex officio being allowing the enforcement body to take action without a complaint, so on its own basis. And as we said, the issue of Ukrainian exporters to and Ukrainian importers from the EU. Next slide, please. This is just to mention in the analysis, essentially, I've given some examples of how member states have implemented the directive and are currently in the process of implementing it. Some, I think, some of the provisions that you've included in your draft law are more elegant than some of those that have been used by some of the member states. But it's always interesting and useful to look at how some of these other countries have managed to do it. And then in Annex 2, just a list of the enforcement authorities. You can see what type of enforcement authority have been selected in various countries. I'm sure one of the issues you've already discussed is the issue of whether it'll be a competition issue or whether it'll be an agriculture issue. Different countries have chosen different paths and sometimes have combined both competition and agriculture institutions to implement it. Last slide, please. These are just some of the final ideas, just to round off. I think it's a fantastic, as I said, initiative by all the stakeholders involved in the memorandum. It's something that in the EU we waited far too long to do, and as a result, many of our producers have suffered terribly at because of these imbalances. Having said that, of course, it's a very controversial and difficult piece of legislation, but I think it's the right thing to do and at the right time. The choice of the directive, as I say, gives you the freedom which you've quite appropriately used to regulate it in the way that you, in accordance with your own priorities and the mechanisms and systems that are at your disposal. Many of the provisions have been directly transposed, some have not, but as I say, that's not a problem. And I think we've seen how difficult it was in many of the EU member states to introduce this legislation. And I think this has been an excellent initiative, and I think the way that Ukrainian stakeholders and lawmakers have gone about it has been excellent. So that's a short overview of the analysis. I'm sorry if I skipped over some issues, but I think if you're interested in more detail, please please read the analysis, or if you have any specific questions and or comments or challenges, please feel free to get back to me now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Річарде, дякую.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much for this great presentation and for your high appreciation of this initiative.
Я перепрошую, зараз звертаюсь до колег.
I'm
Будь
now
ласка.
referring to my colleagues. Please, dear colleagues, if we can arrange it in the following way. We're going to give an opportunity to our colleagues to ask questions about the presentation made so far, and we can have a discussion and express our general vision regarding everything. Dear colleagues, please, you're welcome. I cannot see a lot of raised hands. What is your assessment of those points expressed in the presentation with regards to the EU directive? What do you think about this initiative? Do you have any concerns about that? Especially, I'm referring to the members of parliament, if they have any. Alexander, you're muted. Nope. Alexander, please. We cannot hear you. Nope, doesn't work.
Ще раз спробуйте.
Try it once again, please. Nope.
На жаль, ми не маємо зв'язку з Олександром.
Unfortunately, there is poor connection with Alexander. Sorry about that. We all understand in this situation, we were never surprised. So please, Rodion. Good afternoon, Oleg. Good afternoon, Richard. Good morning, dear colleagues, and good afternoon. I want to thank you very much for this presentation. It was really very interesting. Given we have been using your deliverables for quite a while, and there are a lot of things that you were referring to are indeed important. First of all, this has to do with relations with retail on the one hand and with the institutions on the other, because those institutions can actually influence some of the decisions and solutions that are on the table. Given the discussions that are going around, so to say, over the last 6 months, and we started thinking about how to build proper relations with the trade chains and manufacturers, producers. Oleg referred already at the very beginning that there has been a working group that's been active so far, and we have also put together the subcommittee group in the parliament. We're starting from May. Actually, all of the agri-food representatives were or have been, and altogether there were association members and all the other stakeholders. So some of the associations left this negotiation process because they didn't want to talk to those chains anymore, just because those trade chains were trying to do everything possible that this regulatory and legislative settlement could be lifted. They do not want any kind of legislative provisions about that. They just want to fix those issues at the level of supplier versus the chain, just as part of their commercial activity. While if they see if there are proposals or suggestions to bring it up to the legislative level, they want to replace it by something very small, a document that would not have any tangible legal power, like a memorandum or letter of intent or something like that. Unfortunately, this process has lasted for 6 months at least, and they were just doing the talking and doing nothing else. But we still made sure that the trade legislation will be considered definitely at the Parliament committee session. I mean, the subject matter committee, because the chairperson of the committee was against our requests, but we still added that issue on the agenda. So hopefully we're going to come up with a certain solution to this problem. With regards to what you talked about in your presentation, I mean, subjectively, I think that the key challenge right now is related to the fact that we need to directly make those chains, force them to talk about the legislative way to settle the issue. Because we all here realize definitely without their consent, whatever it is, whether forced or not forced, we still need to implement this legislative initiative. It's going to be a challenging process, nevertheless. Our main goal, however, is to make sure that we start at least talking to them in this legislative environment. And this is the way to find compromise solution to make a good match between our interests and their possibilities. This is just in a nutshell. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to each other, and thank you for the job that you've done. It's great. Thanks.
Thank you. Just maybe 2 words in answer to that, if I may. The supermarket chains, the retail chains will of course fight against such a legislative initiative when we're talking about protecting the weaker side of the negotiating table. The stronger side always wants to retain its stronger position. It's as you say, it can only be resolved really by discussions in the EU. Of course, the EU took the initiative, and through a directive, it imposes this obligation on the member states. And, you know, in your discussions, you can, of course, use the fact that this is also an obligation imposed by the EU. It's a gradual process of approximation, but this is how the EU thinks that business in the agri-food chain should be done. And so I think the proposals that you are making are not particularly burdensome for the supermarket chains, the retail chains. I think they're very reasonable, and it may help if you do some sort of regulatory impact analysis, which basically quantifies the costs of implementing this. They won't be so large as many of the supermarkets maybe are afraid of. You know, they're afraid of having their negotiating position weakened, but it won't, I don't think, impose such huge costs on them that it's something that they should be fighting so strongly about. So maybe that might be a couple of ways to facilitate that discussion.
Дякую, дуже слушна пропозиція. Я
That's a
думаю,
very sound proposal. I think definitely we're going to take advantage of this proposal. And once we are done with our discussions, we're going to definitely find a certain solution in the middle. Because indeed, we need to do a certain impact assessment for ourselves and for the chains, because this is an obligation on ourselves as well, and we will also be bearing certain costs and risks as well, because we will be committed against the chains and also against the consumers in the end of the day.
дякую.
Thank you.
Ви виключили мікрофон.
Так я вже
Річард,
сказав усе.
I already said it. I didn't. Richard, I want to thank you very much for your comment. It was a very sound one. We have a preliminary arrangement with the Kyiv School of Economics. So we're analyzing this issue regarding this impact assessment. I think we're going to have an opportunity under this APD cooperation together with you and the other actors to address those issues. Maybe it's going to be the next step to just reinforce our analytics, so to say, and to have a certain economical background regarding this initiative. What's going to be the impact, really? So we're going to ask the Kyiv School of Economics to actually jointly do this work shortly. And then we're going to present the outcomes. Alexander, please. You didn't have sound, so do you have it now? Yes, thank you. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can. Thank you very much, Oleg. Good morning, good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you very much, Richard, for this amazing presentation. It's a very profound work that you've done. Because you have indicated the strength and somewhere the weaknesses as well in our draft law. I think we're going to be reinforced by this. These recommendations are really important for us. What I wanted to tell you about is to agree with the chains, it doesn't seem to be quite feasible because the position that those chains are trying to reinforce, and that's actually also supported by some of the MPs in the parliament, who seem to be independent moderators, but well, they're not. Actually, this is an attempt not to let any possibility to implement or align with the European acquis. Because if the directive is implemented with no change, or alternatively, if we push it through the draft law somehow, I think from this presentation, this draft law is built and based on the directive. And also it is quite kind of aligned with the Ukrainian realities. So the prospects to agree and convince them are very vague, to nothing, to no. Because that's the opinion of the agri-food business who are major suppliers. However, I do not still understand why some of the industrial goods are not included in that list, because they actually also are available in those trade chains and they have some similar issues. I think we need to be looking for a convincing opinion across the state, because sometimes adoption of such controversial and regulatory and legislative bills can sometimes trigger a lot of resistance inside of the country. So we just need to push it through, go through it, and it's very important to have enough political will on the top of the state. Unfortunately, right now we haven't seen that yet, at least from the officials and legislative or executive institutions. We cannot see this in our legislative bodies. No, it's not there. So I think we still need to continue working on this. I want to call upon all the participants today, the colleagues of ours, the signatories to the memorandum. Let us continue to work on it, because the memorandum will expire in a month. Let us sign an agreement, and we'll do it publicly, because this is going to be our common position, our joint opinion, and we're going to be demonstrating that there are so many stakeholders that are trying to push it through, whatever it takes. When we're talking about this regulatory environment, I think there are certain items that I would like to discuss at a later stage. I'm not going to be taking a lot of your time now, but please, we need to sign a proper paper. We are ready to be engaged technically, or we are even ready to sign it in a hard copy. So let us decide on this today, and then we're going to work with the other signatories and associations who are not yet ready to be with us on this path. And it's going to be a strong signal that we are moving forward, whatever it takes, and we're together. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, for this opportunity to talk about this and for your analysis as well. Thank you very much, Alexander. Dmitro Kohan, can you hear us? Do you have a chance to say a couple of words about that? Please share some comments. Yes, dear colleagues. Hi, I do apologize. I'm just on the move. Well, regarding everything that we're discussing, I'm very supportive that this group that is resisting everything of this is indeed an attempt to disrupt everything. Actually, this entire story about that group that is pushing against that, I think that's something really nasty. I understand that some of those people are trying to resist. Sorry, I just connected in last minute. I don't want to spend time discussing all of them. Regarding our situation, indeed, yes, let us have the formal signing of the proper document. And it's going to be a very good publicity thing, because we've known each other for years now. All the supporters are well known. Let us make it publicly visible. Let us build some publicity on this. I would suggest to make him to arrange a meeting with Hetmantsev and Skorotenko from the parliament. They'll be asking, okay, where is this bill? It's there. I don't know if everybody has seen it, but they produced another one, and it was almost a copy paste as compared to ours. So I think we can still do some work about that. I would believe if there were any good attempts from the trade chains and they're trying to protect themselves, that's why this is their opinion. Sorry, no sound anymore. I think your connection is slow to none. Dmitro, can you hear us? We cannot hear. I'm sorry. Well, thank you very much, Dmitry. Oh, sorry. I do apologize. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can. My apologies. I'm just talking on the phone, and I had a phone call on the other side. When 3 months ago we just proposed this this document, and we suggested this memorandum, the chains said after they don't even want to consider that. We don't need any regulation. And when there was the bill, the legislative bill on the horizon, they were running with the memorandum saying, hey, we have the memorandum, but what they're suggesting right now is just like nothing. It's not going to solve anything. Yes, they're going to settle the timing, the timeline, the deadlines, I mean. And as you know, maybe I shouldn't say that, but it is what it is. We were studying the Russia's experience. They just figured out how to regulate those deadlines in the first tense, and they were just penalizing all those trade chains. This is what Oleg mentioned at the very beginning. They just said an inconvenient deadline for the chains, and if not, then you're going to be penalized. You're going to face charges. But I think we need to think about something else. However, the entire idea behind this document, I think, are very sound. It's very sound. So I think we need to somehow discuss that and push that. Regarding the memorandum, I'm fully supportive of that. We need to re-sign it again. Regarding the next steps, I just recommend you to organize more meetings with Hitmantsev and Sveridenko, as well as the other processors. Let us just work a little bit more on that. Yes, I think this is a very good initiative. The only thing that I would like, I'm sorry about that, but the only thing I'd like to ask the next speakers, since you're suggesting to re-sign the memorandum once again, yes, we can do that first, and then let's do it step by step. So we sign the document first, and then we follow with the other initiatives, because this way we're going to have a clear opinion, clear position expressed. And since the year is ending soon, maybe within a couple of weeks or later, we can actually arrange a meeting offline, talk to the stakeholders, and then think about the initiative that we will be pushing forward. Larissa, please. Excuse me, Oleg. Let me say a couple of words because I might get disconnected. The only request that I want to make, let's not jump into long discussions. Let's just take the text that we have right now and just change the date. 2022, change for 2023. That's it, and sign it. Well, if our colleagues support that, because the document has nothing to change, actually. I mean, there's nothing to, I have a question to Dmitro. Just a remark regarding what he said. Dmitry, these suggestions that we've heard from the presentation, what do you think? Is it not good to include them? For instance, we were trying to analyze those regulations from through the prism of the national producers, but Is it worth including those recommendations expressed in the presentation? Alexander, I'm sorry, I'm not a legal professional. I am a professional in a different sphere. But they always congratulate me on the lawyer's day. I don't know why. Well, if we can do something fast, let's do it. If it doesn't take too much time. But I'm just concerned that we're gonna jump into long discussions that will last for months. If we already have understanding about how we should edit this document, let's do it. No problem. I'm not just sure. Let's think about it quite quickly and do it swiftly. Yes, I think it's worth not to waste time for minor details. We have an agreed opinion. Why shouldn't we actually push it forward? Unless you have any major concerns, of course. This is just an option. Larissa, please, I'm sorry. Thank you so much. I just wanted to draw your attention to the European Integration Committee. We had a case when amendments were made to the public oversight not in line with the European acquis, and then we had to stop this process. And how we did it, we engaged European experts to analyze that legislation because they had not heard what the EU acquis said about this. I think we have deputy ministers in each ministry. There are deputy ministers for European integration. And the Ministry of Economy is the key stakeholder here, as well as the Ministry of Agriculture, because we are talking about agri-food. I think we need to somehow to think about this option. We have an international expert. I think we can engage this potential from those European integration deputy ministers. And I think they're going to provide major support. And it's going to be very hard to resist, even though somebody might want to lobby something else. I think it's going to be just very comprehensive and a system approach. Thank you, Volodymyr, please. Thank you so much, Oleg. Can you hear me? Yeah. First of all, allow me to express my words of gratitude to Richard. And I wanted to ask if there is a chance to arrange a letter on behalf of the project to Olga Stefanishina, the Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration. With such a proposal, we need to swiftly align our legislation with the EU directive, something like that. I would also invite Olga Stefanishina to the signing ceremony of this memorandum, because this is a very strong signal. What we worked on with the Chamber of Commerce and Ms. Lichman, I think this is a neglection of all the European principles, what they're expressing actually. And in the last meeting, moreover, the trade chains representatives, they said, you're not the right people to talk to. We are not dealing with you. We're going to be talking to large businesses, which contradicts not only to the regulations, and this is just not common sense. It's not according to normal principles. This is like blackmailing. Even I would say, I would put it that way if you want. Same thing about the wineries and about vineyards and wineries. There are so many different sectors where some of the companies face certain challenges, and those producers were just kicked out from those trade chains. Of course, this initiative is very good. We need to re-sign the memorandum. We need to build strong publicity around it, really invite all the representatives of the cabinet of ministers who are responsible for it. And in this signing ceremony, we would like to have Richard Moody. I think this is going to reinforce this activity, and this will draw attention from the cabinet and so many other officials. Well, we have a lot of bills actually in the pipeline that sometimes pass overnight. And this one is being challenged all the time. So I think we need to raise the profile, and that's going to help a lot. And I think the national associations, other national association, will be eager to join the initiative as well after this is done. I think this is a very good thing to invite Olha Stefanishina, the Vice Prime Minister. Then we can think about how we can organize this, and also the Minister of Agri-Minister and Minister of Economy as well. Why not? I mean, those are the key dedicated ministers who are responsible for transposing the EU acquis into the Ukraine's legislation. If this is yesable to you, we're happy to prepare an official letter and invite those people. It's going to be a great opportunity to discuss, to have this official thing. And then, as for your comment, I mean, this has to be an official request. The official request. I'm sorry. So we're going to ask you to actually share the minutes with the participants of this meeting, and then regarding how we should organize this official procedure, we're going to think about how to best do it. And dear colleagues, please, if you have any other comments, remarks, or anyone else who is willing to express anything about this regarding the initiative and regarding the presentation from Mr. Richard Moody, we still have a little bit of time. Well, actually, the response is clear. I mean, you can hear that from the answers, Richard. So many meetings we've had about this initiative, so many working meetings we have enjoyed. As Dmitro said, everybody knows everything about this. All the actors are quite aware of what's going on. And we can see the opposing party as well. I mean, those that are trying to push it back. Clearly what their motivation is, isn't it? I mean, and we even know who is going to speak on their behalf, who exactly. I think my colleagues can support me if I'm wrong, if I'm right. So I think this is a high chance and a very good opportunity, given the comments from you, Richard, and the other stakeholders. We need to speed up this process, boost it, maybe give a different momentum to it right now, because this initiative is highly welcome. So we just from the other participants, from our participants here, I think we need to make it a high-profile case, give it more publicity, and then I think it's going to work. So, dear colleagues, since we have received several suggestions already, let us just agree if we can set the date tentatively, so that we can get together and do the formal thing, and then we're going to continue pushing it forward. Rodion, do you support this idea at all? Yes, indeed, I do support that. And I think if you're not against, I can actually come to you tomorrow, and we're going to sit down and think about how we should organize this. Yes, no problem. Let's have a meeting tomorrow. We can just discuss things, talk to the other colleagues, and at least we can actually talk offline and actually draw the agenda, so to say. So the idea is that we just do the minimum edits to the document, not to actually do any profound changes. If you are in favor of this, so please, dear colleagues, we can actually push it forward already tomorrow and then arrange everything regarding the official meeting. Dear colleagues, any other things, ideas, comments, please? Gennady, I think it's great that you're here. Gennady, can you hear us? Gennady? Yeah, I do apologize. I just have very poor connection. That's fine. You are working so hard in this business, not even a year, for a year, but for decades. 2.5 years. Oh, sorry, 2.5 decades. Well, actually, I'm fully supportive of what's been said by our colleagues. I'm actually ready to be one of the signatories to this memorandum. Our association so far had never been engaged directly into this, but you are very right, dear colleagues, and I'm very supportive of the idea. Let us engage the top government officials. Because so far we have seen very clear resistance, and they're trying to engage any mechanisms to resist that, especially that is practiced so much by some of the MPs. So we need to find a different mechanism that will help us push this process forward. And I can see that through the Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration, this is the right thing to do. Besides, it would be really good if the government could put it on their action plan for 2023 to implement this EU directive. If this is done on the formal side, it's going to be a really strong push forward to the implementation process. So let us at least try to elaborate on this and to push it forward officially so that we can have this official meeting. And potentially this can be then part of the government's action plan for the next year. Thank you very much, Gennady. You see, Richard, it's so nice to see so many people that are thinking in the same way. And thank you very much again for your presentation, because you can see how much support it's had so far. Because these are real professionals that have been there for years. But once again, dear colleagues, regarding those initiatives that have been voiced by our colleagues, anyone against? All in favor? If so, then we can already work on this, and definitely this month we can have such an event. So if you're not against, then we can start doing that tomorrow. Do we have the Ukrainian Business Council? If you have anything to say. Darina, are you with us? Unfortunately, I cannot see and hear you. But anyways, we're going to be working on this already tomorrow, and we'll engage the colleagues that will be willing to be part of this process. So, dear colleagues, any questions, remarks, objections? None. Everything's fine. Okay, if you allow me, on behalf of all today's participants, I only want to share my words of gratitude to Richard for this brilliant presentation. And it was very good for us to hear when you said this is a brilliant initiative or excellent one. I think I share the same opinion, and I think all the colleagues of ours share the same thing. So thank you very much for a very objective assessment of our bill. It's good that we have common understanding of everything, and this is really important. And I think we're gonna be pushing that forward step by step, and finally this initiative will be implemented and enforced. Thank you very much, Richard, once again. I'm so glad to see you today. Even though you're thousands of miles away from Ukraine, but we can still feel that you're near. And thanks very much to Maria and all the other participants, as well as the organizers of today's event. Thanks to the interpreter for the very humble interpretation. And Richard, if you can say a couple of words in closing, we're going to appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, just a couple of words, literally. Thank you very much, Oleg. Yes, just to confirm, I absolutely support the initiative. I also think your next steps are the right steps, involving the high-level official, referring to the EU and the obligations under the association agreement is the right way to move it forward. So I congratulate you on what you've achieved already, and wish you all the best in bringing this over the finish line.
Great, Richard. Once again, thank you very much. Cannot thank you enough for this brilliant discussion and for your presentation. I want to thank all the colleagues for your active participation. So see you shortly. Hopefully very soon we will be actively involved in organizing everything, and we're going to meet online soon to discuss all the next steps and agree and actually sign the memorandum again. Thank you very much. Have a safe evening. Have a great day. Sorry? Maybe we should sign it in your, I think, in your organization. Yeah, it's been a tradition already, so why not? We can do it on our premises. The only thing that we need to, first of all, have this offline meeting. If everybody is willing to join us, please do so. We're going to do everything possible so that everybody is engaged and we're going to be all together, and we'll fix that. Once again, dear colleagues, thank you very much, Richard, again and again. Many thanks and have a great day. See you next time. Thank you.
Дякую, дякую.
Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.